Lynne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I would love to know, as a circadian rhythm expert, what is your anti-jetlag protocol? People take melatonin, takes it as they're basically getting in bed at night, and you're saying we don't want to be doing that.
Our clocks are constantly looking for cues from the environment and from our own behavior to keep synced. And primary of those is light and dark.
What are your thoughts on daylight savings time?
Yeah, this has evolved from talking to people over the last couple of years.
If we wanted to ditch our alarm clocks, how could we do it? Because you also put yourself through some crazy stuff in writing the book and doing experiments on yourself. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Liz Moody podcast, where every week we are sharing real science, real stories, and realistic tools that actually level up every part of your life. I'm your host, Liz Moody, and I am a best-selling author and longtime journalist. Today, I'm joined by Lynne Peeples, a leading science journalist with master's degrees in biostatistics from Harvard and science journalism from NYU. And if that wasn't impressive enough, she is also an MIT Knight Science Journalism Fellow, and her writing has appeared in publications like The Guardian, Scientific American, and The Atlantic. Lynne just published a brilliant book called The Inner Clock, Living in Sync with Our Circadian Rhythms. To write it, she dove into all of the latest research, and she ran some really crazy experiments on herself, like living in a cave with zero light exposure. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that our inner clocks are important, not just for sleep and energy, but for our mental health, our hormones, our gut health, our immune health. Our inner clocks control 99% of the cells in our bodies, which is why I was so excited to ask Lynne all of my highly specific questions about how to actually action this information to optimize our daily lives. Lynne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. We love all things circadian rhythms, and so I'm excited to get into some hacks, some pragmatic action tips that we can apply to our lives, that we can get more energy, we can get better sleep. But I would love for you to just start us off by explaining in the easiest to understand way possible what a circadian rhythm is and how it impacts our health.
Yes. So you and I and all your listeners have trillions of tiny timekeepers throughout our bodies. So everywhere from our brain to our bowels, from the follicles in our hair to like the muscles in our legs. And these are all coordinating with one another to prime our bodies to do the right things at the right times. We don't have the energy to do everything all the time, right? So defending ourselves against invading parasites, sleeping, waking, and metabolism, digesting food, all these things can be done all the time. So our body has a circadian rhythm to these cycles. So it's optimizing the times that it's ready to do these things. And circadian, that breaks down to circa and diem. Circa means about or around, and diem means day. So these clocks are not precision timepieces. They are running at about 24 hours a day, not precisely, which means to keep coordinated with each other and with the 24-hour day that we're living in, we need constant recalibration. So our clocks are constantly looking for cues from the environment and from our own behavior to keep synced. And primary of those is light and dark, but it's also like when we eat and these other things in our everyday lives. So thus creates the circadian rhythm.
It's so interesting. So a question I've always had is, in the time before all of the artificial inputs that are impacting our circadian rhythms, if our circadian rhythms are impacting 99% of the cells in our body, were people having less hormonal issues and immune issues and all these other things that we think of as tied to circadian rhythms?
I would say very likely. It's one critical component. I mean, all our circadian rhythms coordinate the ebb and flow of hormones, the cycling and when genes are on and off and the proteins that are made, and all our body systems are doing these things, again, optimized to peak at certain times of day. So if we are out of whack from that cycle that we evolved to have, if we are not getting light and dark, which I'm sure we'll get into, or eating at off times, those things are going to get off. And no doubt it's going to affect your hormones and these other things.
Can you break down some of the other ways outside of our energy and our sleep that our circadian rhythms impact our body? Because I think we all think of like, oh, my circadian rhythm is messed up. Maybe I won't sleep as well tonight. It obviously impacts so much more than that. So I'd love for you to get into some of those ways people might not think of.
That ebb and flow throughout the day, that includes when you are most alert and maybe most productive. So it impacts your workday. When are you most primed to do your best work? And knowledge of that is super powerful, as well as athletic performance. When are you strongest? When are you fastest? That is also optimized and peaks at a certain time of day. And also when your body is most ready to digest and metabolize food. And that has profound implications, of course, because healthy metabolism is critical to stave off diabetes, obesity, and those kinds of things. So all these systems, everyday things like productivity and performance to our overall health, our day-to-day health, our long-term health are implicated.
All right. So what controls our internal clock? We hear about light a lot, but what other factors are at play? And can you explain how light is impacting our circadian rhythm?
So light is the primary one. Real quick, relatively long list. Scientists are even still teasing it out. We think there's maybe a minor role for temperature. Perhaps for humans, it's more of a backup because it kind of corresponds with light and dark, right, on a day-to-day basis. For some creatures, we found it actually is a pretty important cue. So they rely on temperature quite a bit.
Or is that a creature that would live in like a more northern climate where they wouldn't have as much light exposure?
Good question. I don't even remember off the top of my head what creature that is, but I know this has come up. Everything from parasites to plants to penguins to people. We're all living by our inner clocks. And in some of those creatures, I guess a plant, you're stuck in the ground. So the environment around you is constantly changing and you're not really creating an artificial environment like we do. So different things are going to impact the plant, although light, again, is primary. For, a lot of creatures on this planet, light and dark are key. There are nocturnal animals, which see things sort of in a reverse. But light is perceived by the circadian system through this third photoreceptor that was only recently identified just a few decades ago. And it is picking up on the wavelengths of light as well as the intensity of light to send information to the quote-unquote master circadian clock in the brain. You could call this the master. Some people don't like that term anymore because we're learning more and more how powerful these other clocks throughout our body can be and how they can actually kind of work on their own and ignore messages from this master clock. But generally speaking, you can think of this clock as the conductor of this symphony of clocks throughout your body, and it's taking cues from this third photoreceptor about what kind of light is coming in. And if that's light that's usually produced by the sun at midday or at morning or at night, that's telling that clock what time it is. If you're indoors, you're not getting that information. And that has potentially be a cascade of consequences throughout the body because the messages that you're expecting this master clock to send to the other clocks are not getting through. Morning light's a little different than midday light as far as, how the blue wavelengths, the orange wavelengths, the intensity of that light, evening, sunset. Pay attention to the sky, and it changes across the day.
So that's light.
That's light.
What about, I know that our digestion is impacted by our circadian rhythm, but does when we eat impact our circadian rhythm as well? Is it a bidirectional relationship?
We think so. Our scientists think so. I'm speaking for them. That point I made about the master clock being, a tentative term now because we actually have seen the liver clock can take the message of when we've consumed food as kind of a primary cue as to the time. So it can get out of sync from the brain clock if we've taken food at an unexpected time. But that is also showing to potentially disrupt the brain clock. So there's this kind of bidirectional relationship that we're still teasing out. But yes, food is probably number 2 on the list of important cues to our clocks.
So would you say if we wanted to focus on 2 things for optimizing our circadian rhythm, food timing and light exposure would be the two that you would choose?
That's what I've chosen.
Okay. We love that. We're going to get into all of your routines too, because I'm so curious after reading this book. Because you also put yourself through some crazy stuff in writing the book and doing experiments on yourself.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
Can you share like one that stands out in your mind? What was the craziest thing that you did in the course of writing this book?
I mean, the craziest thing was definitely the 10 nights I spent in a Cold War era bunker.
With no exposure to light.
With no daylight.
No daylight.
But I did have some dim red light the whole time I was underground. Had to keep it safe. Had to see while I was teaching myself to juggle and play the harmonica.
Well, and the reason for red light, which we'll get into different light spectrums later, but that's because that's thought to have less of an impact on your circadian rhythm than any other color of light, correct?
Yes.
So what was that like? Did you go crazy?
I mean, probably a little bit. I mean, I was proud of myself. I thought I did okay, but yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I was a little whacked out. So mentally, yes, and that could be related to my circadian rhythms, which I have data to show definitely got whacked out. I had a bunch of devices, so I taped temperature sensors on various body parts. I wore basically every device they make to measure sleep and heart rate, oxygen, all these things, plus glucose monitor and a light sensor just to make sure I was getting the right, not too much light. And some scientists helped me analyze that data. And sure enough, after like day 5, my rhythms were just completely out of sync with each other and definitely out of sync with what was going on above ground. At one point, I was living my days at, when everybody else would be asleep up above ground. So it was wild.
Did you sleep okay during that time?
So. The science helped me understand after going to bed at odd times, eating at odd times, according to what my body had been used to, I ended up getting up to having to pee several times a night.
And that's not normal for you?
Not normal, and there's circadian explanation because your body, your bladder and stuff does things to try to help you sleep through the night on a circadian rhythm. So when you throw that off, it's not a shock that happens more.
That's so interesting. Are there any other benefits that we might not think of that we could expect to see if we optimize our circadian rhythm? Like you might not get up to pee as much in the middle of the night. Is there anything else that's kind of strange like that?
Yeah, your hunger hormones, the ghrelin and the leptin that suppresses your hunger, those are on circadian rhythms. So if you keep things in sync, you just might find your hunger patterns are different. You might not have those cravings, late at night, which it's kind of a positive feedback. If you can avoid eating late, which again is one of those big takeaways that I had from my reporting, is to stop eating, about 3 hours before bed to support circadian rhythms and a whole host of health benefits to that. And you kind of train your body, and then your circadian system is not pumping out the hunger hormone later. You don't eat, you get kind of this positive cycle going there. Those peaks in productivity and performance, I feel like that's kind of untapped potential for a lot of people. Once you realize it, it's hard to miss it. Once I noticed when my kind of ebb and flow throughout the day, it was pretty clear. But some of us are, at least I hadn't thought about it that much. I just kind of noticed things, but I didn't really put it on a clock. So I think has a lot of potential.
And then on the flip side, are there signs that we could be looking for in our lives that our circadian rhythms might be a little messed up?
To really tell if your own circadian system's disrupted, there's sort of the acute disruption and then there's the chronic. So acute, you can think of jet lag. So jet lag is circadian disruption. And when we travel across time zones, as one scientist explained it to me, it's like we're scattering our clocks across the globe. Because our clocks are, again, they're not ticking at exactly 24 hours and they may not all tick the same. And so we travel and we're picking up these various cues and our clocks they're kind of scattering and we're thrown into this new light-dark cycle. And it's going to take us a while to sync our clocks together and sync to that new time zone. And we're going to feel the effects. We're going to feel, some stomach troubles. We're going to have trouble sleeping at night. We might have a headache, foggy thinking. So that's kind of some of the acute effects that are a good sign to you that you've thrown your clocks out of whack. Long term, this is where I think there's a lot of profound promise in understanding circadian rhythms, but it's subtle but profound. So those chronic long-term effects, which are seen sadly really strongly among shift workers, because they're chronically disrupting their circadian rhythms. And they probably don't feel great, but it's that long-term effect of having your body not doing the right things at the right time and not being ready to handle things like the metabolism. And that's setting you up for, potentially higher risks of obesity, diabetes, down the road dementia, those kinds of things. And that's, it's hard to tell because there's so many factors in our lives that are not healthy, right, that are setting us up. But I think this is one risk factor that, we have some control over, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the difference between is this the sole cause of all of these ailments? Probably not. Is this something that we can make these tiny little tweaks and see a real profound effect? Yes. And I think that's incredible. And shift workers, if you're listening, we are going to get into tips for you. I know that is a highly requested topic. But first, I would love to know, as a circadian rhythm expert, what is your anti-jet-lag protocol?
I now try to adjust a little bit ahead, which is one of, it's a tool that people have probably thought about. But, 4 days ahead of a trip, if I'm going, a few time zones, try to nudge my bedtime and wake time a little bit more each day. And now I am enlisting light. So in the morning, depending on which direction I'm traveling, adding some extra blue light to my third photoreceptors to nudge the clocks forward. So essentially making me tired earlier at night if I get that blue light in the morning.
Do you do that with just a light box?
I have a few tools now that I've accumulated in reporting this book. I have a couple sun lamps, and then I also have these glasses that beam blue light into the eye called ProPeaks, made by a European company. But they're actually really popular now among athletes. A whole lot of Olympic athletes use these.
That's so interesting. I always wonder that because, we see them all show up in Paris and then they're starting to compete. And I'm like, are they jet lagged? Are they tired? What are they eating? Right. How are they sleeping in these cardboard beds, et cetera? Yet they're supposed to be at peak performance.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, they can't arrive a week ahead to get adapted. So there's tips and tricks that chrono coaches are using to help athletes adjust their jet lag faster, as well as adjust their clocks to match up with that peak performance time of their event.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's not even about, I want to be on Paris time. It's my event is at 8 p.m. tonight, so I need to be at peak performance at 8 p.m.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Right.
Are there any little hacks that we could use if, say, we have a presentation and we want to be on point for that? What could we do?
Same thing. So you got to figure out your prime time for whatever it is. If it's a presentation you're giving, when are you at your most alert? When do you think you're clearest? Figure that out. And then there's probably only so much wiggle room you have, but if you can try to trick your body into thinking it's that time at the hour that you have to give the presentation.
Which you're doing with blue light exposure.
With blue light exposure. And then at night, you can also wiggle your clock by blocking blue light. On both ends of the day doing that, and also just shifting your meals, right? Slowly shifting your meals to correspond with what those hours would be around that peak time you're looking for.
How many days ahead of time do you need to do that to get it to shift and to feel the effects?
The longer you have, the more secure that rhythm will be. But jet lag on average takes about a day per time zone crossed to adjust. And I think with some of these techniques, you can speed that up. This isn't available yet, but there's also some pretty wacky, cool science in the works that you might be able to do that super fast with weird flashes of light in the eye while you sleep. There's a scientist at Stanford working on this technology, and there's other scientists working on pills that you can pop to immediately adjust your clock by a certain number of hours at a time. And then DARPA, so the government's also working on an ingestible kind of implant in which sort of a living pharmacy that you can automate with a remote control, basically change your rhythm. So this all sounds science fiction-y, but it sounds like there's actual promise in these technologies coming to fruition.
That is so fascinating and crazy that we would just be able to do it so quickly like this. And it makes sense that the government is researching it. Okay, so you're kind of trying to match up your food with the eating times of wherever you're going, and you're trying to match your light exposure with the wake and sleep times of wherever you're going via blue light in the morning and avoiding blue light at night, right?
Right.
And then what else are we adding in there to avoid jet lag?
Yeah, melatonin can also be a powerful tool in this scenario. Melatonin should naturally start rising according to that time zone. So that's probably 2-3 hours before you would want to go to bed. Not right before you want to go to bed, but a few hours before that. And then that kind of prompts your body to start that whole cascade of hormones and such that's going to get you sleepy and help you sleep.
Which is interesting because I feel like a lot of people take melatonin. First of all, they take it on a regular basis, which we have cautioned against on this podcast. Yes. Most scientists are like, that's a hormone. You don't want to be taking that every single night. But you're saying in acute situations.
I think it has its place. Yeah.
It has its place. But anybody I know who takes it as they're basically getting in bed at night. And you're saying we don't want to be doing that.
Exactly. That was what I was doing if I was taking it to try to treat my insomnia. And that's going to make it worse because then you're going to like get sleepier later the next night because you're telling your body it's later.
You're actually delaying in some ways the release of this rush of melatonin to 2 to 3 hours later than you would actually want it to be releasing.
Exactly.
So if you are using melatonin, first of all, please don't use it on a regular basis. Please talk to your doctor about including anything like this. But if you are going to take it in an acute circumstance, 2 to 3 hours before desired bedtime, not at desired bedtime.
That is what I've been told by the scientists.
All right, amazing. Anything else for jet lag?
I can share a cautionary tale. So again, the light and dark patterns of your destination city is what you should be trying to match. You should be trying to expose yourself to that light and that dark. However, I was traveling to London, ultimately from Seattle with a brief stop in New York a couple of years ago, and I thought I was doing the right thing, got off the airplane, got out in the bright, sunny morning in London, walking to my Airbnb, and later discovered, I had some trouble getting adjusted to the local time there. And then I later discovered that I had, according to my inner clocks, it was still before the midpoint of my sleep. And let me explain that. So your core body temperature drops at night as part of the whole sleep cascade and then rises again towards the morning. And the scientists have found that light exposure before that midpoint of sleep, before that core body temperature minimum, is going to delay your clock. Light after that midpoint is going to advance your clock. And if that light exposure is close to that midpoint, it's going to be pretty extreme in either direction. So my midpoint was just probably before my midpoint and not too far off. So I actually delayed my clock. So rather than trying to get my clocks closer to London time, I was sending them back west to like the West Coast,
So what should you have done?
So I should have worn sunglasses or blue light blockers to protect my third photoreceptor from getting that message because that wasn't the right time yet. And then getting out later in the day to get that light and then trying to just sync from there.
Okay, big question there.
Yes.
If we wake up before the midpoint of our sleep, should we not be on our phones in the middle of the night? But if we wake up after the midpoint of our sleep, could we expose ourselves to the blue light in the middle of the night?
That's a really good question. That's a fun one. I guess it depends on your goal, right? Not everybody wants to advance their clocks and get sleepier the next night. But a lot of us, that probably would be good for us because on average, we drift later. Like most of our clocks run a little longer than 24 hours. And then modern life has exacerbated that for a lot of us. It's kind of stretched those clocks because of our lack of morning light and too much light at night. So not a bad idea. I could help just a little bit. But yeah, definitely no phones, no lights, even the bathroom light. If you go into the bathroom before your midpoint of sleep, be careful. I have like a night light or an electric candle I carry around. That's the safer bet.
An electric candle?
Yes.
Like you're in the old days?
I was doing that for a while, and I have them all around my apartment now. I'm like such a light nerd right now. But yeah, I got a night light, so it's a little less crazy.
Oh, I like that. It's interesting, though, because it sort of answers a question that I get a lot and that I've experienced myself, which is people will say, well, I know blue light's so bad for me at night, but when I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, I go on my phone and that's the only thing that puts me back to sleep. So how is that possible if I shouldn't be having this blue light exposure at night?
That's another key point that scientists also emphasized is that it's all relative, right? If you have a screen, you're looking at it, but it's like relaxing, cute kitty videos or something that does turn the brain off from like those hectic, I got to do this, I got to do that. and quiets the brain. I mean, that the benefit there might outweigh the risk of a little bit of blue light.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's, take everything with a little grain of salt.
With a little grain of salt. Okay. I want to talk about some of the other things that can disrupt our circadian rhythms because there were so many in your book that I had never thought about before. There was wildfire smoke. There were windows, which I knew that they let in less light, and I think it's significantly less than people think because they're like, well, I can see the sun streaming through my window. I must be getting light exposure. And the answer is like, not really. We're not. But you talked about the treatments for them. So can you walk us through some of the things that we might not be thinking are impacting our circadian rhythms, but they are?
Yeah, absolutely. I was shocked by the energy efficiency coatings on our windows. For good energy saving reasons, keep some of those critical blue wavelengths, along with some other wavelengths we're finding are useful for other things, but that's a whole nother tangent, from getting in. Being close to most modern windows is still great, and it's way better than being further away from them or in a windowless
bunker.
Dark but you're not getting the full effect of the sun and its spread of wavelengths. So it's filtering because it's, just like the artificial lights that we have, everything is basically designed, and all our energy codes and everything have been written based on our visual system. We see best when the wavelengths are around the green point on the spectrum. That's what our visual system evolved, to use to paint our picture of our world. And our circadian system just works differently. It's primed more to pay attention to those blue wavelengths. I mean, it takes in all light, get intense enough of any light, and it's going to wake up the circadian system, but it's really, really sensitive to that blue light. So because everything's written that way and because, the energy codes, we weren't really thinking about this before. Now we know. So, what can we do with this information? Should energy codes be rewritten to take into account the circadian system? And I've talked to scientists and others who think they should be.
Well, and you have a fun hack in the book for seeing if your windows are filtering out light that we need for our circadian rhythms. Can you share that?
So scientists taught me that you take your smartphone, turn on the flashlight, and shine it at the window. And if you see little pale colored dots, then on each surface of the window panes, then that means that there's a low E or energy efficiency coating on that glass. So that could potentially be cutting out some of those critical wavelengths of coming into your space.
So if you see those, the action step would be, even if you see light streaming through your windows, you probably are not getting the light effects you need for your circadian rhythm, and you should spend more time outside if possible.
Yes. And, again, it's cutting it down. It's not taking all of it away. So if you spend a lot of time in front of that window, you're probably just fine. But I think the rule for all of us is the more you get outside, the better.
And the lux different is just so drastically different. That was a big takeaway I had in your book, and then with other circadian experts that I've had on the podcast and spoken to, is that even if it seems bright inside, we're talking in the hundreds of lux, which is the amount of light that we're seeing and that our eyes are taking in. And if we're outside, we're in the thousands.
Exactly. And that's, again, that difference between the visual system and the circadian system. We perceive just differently, and our eyes adjust to this different dynamic indoors that it looks bright, but it's just not anything compared to outdoors. Right.
And then other ones that surprised me in your book, wildfire smoke, is that just because it's covering up essentially what the sun is letting in? It's acting as a filter?
There's a couple things going on with wildfire smoke. So yes, it's changing the wavelengths coming through. So it's actually filtering out a lot of the blue, soaking up in its particles. That kind of gets to another potential disruptor is particulate matter itself is among some environmental chemicals that scientists are now finding can disrupt our circadian clocks.
Yeah, talk to me about that because you called out BPA in your book.
Yeah.
You said that BPA is actually impacting our circadian rhythms. And I was like, what? I have never heard that before. Explain that to me.
Yeah, I hadn't either. I mean, I was an environmental health, or still am an environmental health reporter, and covered a lot of endocrine disruptors, which I know you've talked about on this podcast. But I'd never heard of any of these chemicals, plasticizers, affecting our circadian system. But yeah, sure enough, there's been studies done that have found links. And it could potentially, it affects a lot of our body systems, but some of these long-term impacts on the endocrine system and other things could be moderated, or the mechanism could be through our circadian system that those effects are happening. That's a possibility. So this is, again, pretty new research, but the science and the mechanistic explanation for this is pretty solid.
It's so interesting. I've never heard that before, and it kind of just took me aback. And I mean, we don't need more reasons to cut BPA out of our lives as much as possible, but it's a nice impetus. And hopefully, I'm also if enough of these things stack up, will the government have the impetus that it needs to take action? Because there's only so much we should be putting on consumers to take these steps themselves.
Absolutely. And it's, it's frustrating with the whole kind of that cycle of, replacing BPA with just other chemicals that still have the same issues like BPS and so anyway, there's a you can open up a can of worms there. But yes, hopefully,
but yet another reason
we need to be thinking about this and regulating it smartly.
Talk to me about social jet lag.
We've talked about jet lag. Social jet lag is that chronic jet lag that we give ourselves on a week-to-week basis. At least a lot of us do, and I'll explain. So most of us live our work weeks or our school weeks with an alarm clock. I think the science says about 80% of us wake to an alarm clock in the morning, so we are obligated to be somewhere. And then often because we're using that alarm clock, we're getting up before our inner clocks really want us to get up. It's not natural for us. And then naturally, we want to catch up on that lost sleep on the weekend or whenever our days are off, right? And so social jet lag is that inconsistency. So technically it's taking the midpoint of your sleep during your work or school days and comparing that to the midpoint of your sleep on your days off or your weekends. And if those are not the same, which for most of us they're not, then that is called social jet lag. And that basically means you're giving yourself jet lag every week. It's the same as traveling, a couple of time zones, one way on Friday and back on Monday. And that's giving your body and your systems whiplash. It's giving you jet lag that you never fully resolve because you just keep doing it to yourself. It's minor compared to shift work, what shift workers endure, but it's a similar constant circadian disruption. And that's why one of those real key circadian hygiene things that I've been trying to implement in my life has been to try to keep a consistent bedtime and wake time 7 days a week.
I also tried to do that for a number of years. There was recently research, though, that showed if you catch up on sleep on the weekends, you have better cardiovascular health in the long term. Did you read that?
I did see that. I mean, again, this is one of these balancing acts, right? The blue light on your phone, if it's happy context, then, maybe it's okay. Because if you are really sleep deprived, getting some more sleep rather than depriving yourself of more sleep on the weekend is probably better. I mean, this is where individuals can only do so much. I mean, there's a lot we can do as individuals to help our clocks. But we need to think, more broadly, society-wide. Do we need to start school so early? Do we need workplaces to have regimented, early start times? Can we flex some of these things? Can we delay school bells? So that's where that would help us all catch up on sleep.
Do you think that most people would naturally wake up later? Is there data that indicates what time most people would naturally wake up and go to sleep?
Yeah, the study that came closest to pinpointing that number or that time is about 8 or 9 for adults, 8 or 9 a.m. Modern day adults, that's the time we should, on average, wake up. Of course, different for early birds or night owls. But for teenage kids, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's more like 10 or 11. I mean, their rhythms have drifted later at that time in their life. And that's who we're telling to get up and get to school at 7:30.
8 or 9, I think, might surprise a lot of people. It's when I naturally wake up, and I have beat myself up for years for being like an 8:30, 9 a.m. person because the wellness world especially is like 5 a.m. and the high performance world is like 5 a.m. And I've accomplished all these things before you've even opened your eyes. And I'm like, if I wake up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or even 7 a.m., I'm going to be tired all day long, and I'm going to feel like crap all day long. And so I've noticed this in my life. I wake up without an alarm as much as possible. I try to schedule my meetings a little bit later. But what would you say to the people who are like, no, it's much healthier to wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning. The sun has been up for hours. If we're trying to attune to our circadian rhythm, why are we waking up at 8 or 9?
My answer is going to be a little nuanced. So the 8 or 9 that we should all wake up, that's also taking into account we live in this modern world. We've exacerbated kind of the differences in our circadian rhythms and exacerbated our night owlness, right? So it's also taking into account that, okay, well, I'm going to assume you don't get a whole lot of morning light. I'm going to assume you like get some light at night. And so this is your modern society impacted circadian rhythm. If we were all camping, for example, there's been studies that have shown how much just like a weekend of camping can recalibrate your clock to more closely match the sun. In that case, yeah, waking up at 6, depending on the time of year and your latitude, might be totally natural and very healthy.
It's like I'm under artificial light all day.
Yeah.
Even if I go on a circ walk every single morning, but that can only have so much effect because I live in the modern world. I'm changing my circadian rhythm all the time, even with my best efforts, which is why that 12 and 8 makes more sense.
Yeah. And if you're really good and if you like are a construction worker and you're outside all day, then that's just going to pull your rhythm more in line with the sun. And so again, I think a lot of these numbers and times given, it's going to be individual, very, very much.
We do have individual circadian rhythms, and I think that's so important to realize in terms of the permission giving. I know if I'm on vacation, I'm waking up at 8 or 9, and I've heard that's the best way to kind of tell what your natural circadian rhythm would be, right? Like if you go on a 2-week vacation, when would you naturally wake up? When would you naturally go to sleep after, I don't know, like a week of that?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. So for me, that's 8 or 9, and beating myself up for not being like a 5 a.m. person is not helping me, and living in a state of suffering because I'm making myself wake up at 5 a.m. is also not helping me.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, how many of us do that? Like most of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, yeah. Again, with the schedules that society imposes on us. There's a woman, Camilla Kring, in Copenhagen that I met with when I visited Denmark, and she is on a crusade to raise awareness of chronodiversity and to try to unbias society away from just kind of catering to the early birds. Because I think, and then I think it's shifting a little bit since COVID. I think that's has flexed work hours a little bit in some places. Some are kind of going back. Okay, go on and on there. Her idea is that we really need to be taking into account night owls. This is a biological difference. Yes, we have some power with our behavior and environment to influence it, but fundamentally our genes differ, and that is creating different clocks that orient with the sun differently and create different chronotypes. And we need to respect that, and we need to cater to that and kind of even the playing field. And there's win-wins, because if an employer takes this into account, imagine how much more productivity and how many fewer like sick days he's going to have with his employees.
Well, and she's consulted on projects, right? Didn't they have meetings scheduled only between 11 and 4? So if you needed to work on the earlier side, you could. If you needed to work on the later side, you could. But every collaborative endeavor would take place between 11 and 4.
Exactly.
And didn't they see far fewer sick days? People were happier. People were more productive.
Yes, definitely.
So why don't we do it?
Right, but let's, all right, everybody who's hearing this now.
Yeah, if you have the flexibility, yeah, honestly, or if you are an employer, like maybe think about putting your meetings in that 11 to 4. Also, would you say that most people's peak performance tends to fall in that window, or when is that for most people?
On average, it's like late morning. And maybe I'm biased because that's what it is for me, but I think, the data says on average, if you're a middle of the chronotype curve of distribution, 9 to 11, somewhere in that window. But yeah, I mean, I've talked to many people that it's the afternoon. I've talked to many people where that it's like 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., So it differs. And this is why respecting that and allowing that flexibility so workers can work during that time, and especially also work uninterrupted at that
Deep
time.
work, yeah.
So she had a fun little stuffed animal that she'd, set out so people could put it out and be like, this is my, don't disrupt me. This is the time that I need to be focusing. It's a little frog, and she called it Frog Off. So
How do we find that for ourselves? Is it just paying attention?
Yeah, paying attention. Kind of like we were talking about, and finding that optimal rhythm, on vacation. It might be ideal to try to do this on vacation. Like when you're not stressed and you're not sleep deprived because you have just had to get up with an alarm clock. When do you think the best? When are you feeling, most energized and creative? Like some of these things can be at different times too, right? And
even notating it in a little book for a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Do your own research on your body.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. We have a tip in my book to do an N of 1 experiment on yourself. And I love, the placebo-controlled double-blind studies. I think they're amazing. But sometimes getting your own data on yourself, we're also bio-individual, is really helpful too.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. If we wanted to ditch our alarm clocks, how could we do it?
There's 3 core clock rules that I try to live by that I think can help with that ditching of the alarm clock. And we've covered some of these, but I'll just, kind of summarize here. So the first is contrast, increasing the contrast in your life. So again, that's the bright days and the dark nights, and trying to really tell your body, this is day, this is night, and helping at night start that cascade earlier to get yourself to bed. And this is where I enlist my fleet of electric candles around my apartment that I turn on with a remote, and all my friends make fun of me, but I think it's so cozy and so lovely. So number 1, contrast. Number 2 is to constrict, and that's back to those meal times. Scientists shows that if you can create that narrow window of eating throughout the day, so maybe wait an hour or 2 after you get up to take in your first calorie, and then stopping, like not a single, potato chip or sip of wine or anything, about 3 hours before bed. Again, that's going to help your rhythms, plus potentially they're finding possible longevity and other health benefits down the road. And then consistency, which we've also talked about, but that's eating, sleeping, exercising, doing all these things at the same time, 7 days a week. Again, with the caveats about society's strict schedules that we got to work with until we fix them. I think that's, the best we can do to really try to contain our rhythms and get a rhythm to our lives that helps us forego the alarm clock.
Is there any specific advice you'd give to a night owl who has a morning lark job where they're always kind of living a state of jet lag almost?
Yeah. And the first thing would be to try to find a job that's more aligned with your rhythm.
I mean,
but I know that's not possible.
Think about, actually.
Yeah.
Like at first, my first reaction when you said that was like, what? That's crazy. But also we consider so many things when we consider the jobs that we take. I think we should be considering the people we're working with far more than we do, the work that we do. And maybe this is just something else you add. It's not the be all end all, but something else you add to the list of considerations is, can the flexibility of this job match my chronotype?
Yeah. With the awareness of the impacts of circadian disruption, as people become more aware of that, maybe that will go higher on their list of considerations when they look for a job. But yeah, of course, there's people that, may not have the option to be choosy, right?
Do you know what the distribution is of morning people and night people and people who, I don't know, and they're in the middle of that? Is that a thing?
Yes. Oh, okay. The middle of the thing. That's
okay.
Well, I mean, there's many terms being given, but Till Roenberg, who's one of the founders of kind of a lot of this chronotype science, he pegged me as a dove. So I'm pretty much right in the middle of the curve. There's doves, there's early birds, there's night owls, and there's, everything in between. But on average, the night owl end of the spectrum is longer. There's more night owls among us than early birds. But this is also influenced by modern life. So Pyre days, maybe it was a little more even.
We just need to have the whole world go camping for like a number of weeks, and then we'll check in. Okay, you mentioned northern latitudes, and I want to talk about that because that causes a lot of confusion because people are like, well, if it's only light out for 4 hours a day, am I only supposed to be awake for 4 hours a day? How does that work with our circadian rhythms?
We evolved at the equator where it was 12 hours light, 12 hours of dark. And I don't know that the biology is completely caught up with all of us spreading out across the latitudes, especially if people have more recently moved there, right? I don't think we're meant to only be awake for 4 hours. I think that I'm going to give us permission to manipulate the light and dark of our lives and try to create as close to a reasonable length of day as possible with light. It's definitely not clear-cut. The science shows that we do naturally sleep a little longer in the winter than we do in the summer, depending on our latitude. And I think that makes sense. And in Seattle, the days get short in the winter, and they're also dark a lot of those days. So I've talked to scientists, and I'm following their lead and kind of artificially lengthening a day a little bit and definitely brightening it. So, I'll get up 7 or whatever, and for weeks, that's in the pitch dark. And we haven't even tried to go on permanent daylight savings time yet, which I'm scared of because that would be even more weeks in the dark. But I'll blast the sun lamp and artificially make the sunrise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do circ walks, which are just circadian rhythm walks. So it's when I wake up, I go outside for 15 to 30 minutes and go for a walk, or I'll sit outside and read or something, but trying to get that light in my eyes. And people always ask me, well, how do I do that if it's dark outside where I am? And I usually tell people, well, wait until the sun comes up and then do your walk outside then. You want it to be as close to when you get up and when the sun comes up as possible. But you're saying if the goal is to extend your day a little bit because you're in these prolonged darkened periods, then it's okay to, instead of that, almost go for a sunlight lamp or something like that?
Yeah, getting outside. If there is sunlight to be had, that's by far superior. But if it's not there and you're waiting, you would have to wait 3 hours to do that. then I think artificially creating it is good. Ideally, both. The sooner you expose your third photoreceptor to light in the morning, the better. But really, I mean, like getting out within the first couple hours is huge, for that 20-minute walk. So maybe start with a little of that, and then after the sun comes up, get out for that walk as well.
Is there anything else that you do to avoid SAD now that you've done all the circadian rhythm research?
The best treatment for SAD is the best treatment for keeping your clocks happy. And so morning light, and that's what the research shows for SAD, is to focus on getting that morning light. And there's links between SAD and, night owlness. And that could be, that environmentally influenced, behavioral influence, exacerbation of night owlness, because people get stuck in that sort of snowball effect of being up later and later, and then found tremendous benefits from that early morning light. Those kind of go hand in hand, addressing circadian hygiene and treating SAD.
Is there any way that we can tell if our lights are effective, or like a brand that you like?
I would recommend going to the Center for Environmental Therapeutics website. Some really good scientists have evaluated and kind of done the testing and top picks for you. So go to their website and they give some recommendations for the best sun lamps.
And repeat the website.
Center for Environmental Therapeutics.
And what about red light at night? Do you have specific red light brands that you go to at night?
I don't have specifically a red light lamp. That was really just for the bunker for me. But there are lamps out there, particularly for babies and nurseries, because, then you might need more light to get in and take care of things like overnight with a baby, right? But you don't want to disturb their sleep. For my apartment, at night, I just do my candles, and I have like a little strip light underneath my cabinets, which I leave on because that's not too disruptive. And then I try to keep my bedroom just as dark as possible.
I do want to call that out, though, because I do think we've all internalized, like, I shouldn't be on my screens at night, even though most of us probably still do a little bit. But then we think nothing of, like, flicking on our bathroom light and having it be incredibly light in there.
Yes.
And so I just want to take a second to underline the fact that we're talking about wavelengths and spectrums of light, but we're also talking about just lux. We're talking about the amount of light.
Yes, exactly. Because you could cut all the blue light out, and you could jack up a red or orange light, and it could still affect your circadian system. So that is really important to keep in mind. That is, any light intense enough could upset your sleep cascade, part of your circadian rhythm. I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to do to avoid having to flip on the bathroom light. Get a night light, or, be a light nerd like me and carry an electric candle.
What are your thoughts on daylight savings time?
Yeah, this has evolved from talking to people over the last couple of years. I love daylight savings time. I mean, I think a lot of my friends and I are like, great, it's light later, more time to go play. And I don't think it's black and white, but I have been convinced that standard time year-round is healthier for us.
And to be clear, that's the time that starts in the winter, right? And is it December? Does it start?
It's right now it's early November.
Okay.
That we fall back.
So that's when it starts being dark, when you're like walking home from work.
Right.
Right. I hate that.
I know. And I still hate that. But I understand what the scientists are why they're trying to push for permanent standard time. Because going back to how did we evolve? How do we stay in sync with the sun? It's that morning light and it's that dark night. And what we're playing with is that hour. Like, are we going to put that hour of light on the morning or at night? Because the day lengths are not changing. We call it daylight saving time. We're putting that morning light and adding it to the end of the day. So from a circadian perspective, we're taking away morning light and we're adding nighttime light.
In a society that is already skewing towards way too much nighttime light.
Exactly. And the worry, I mean, I've talked to some scientists that I also can kind of agree with in that, like, the status quo may be the least of the evils, although most everyone agrees we hate flipping the clocks back and forth.
I grew up in Arizona where we don't do it.
Yeah.
And so I especially hate it. I grew up and ended up in a different place. I'm in California now and I'm like, what are we doing? This is crazy. Like, why are we doing this?
Right. Oh, and it's not good. I mean, the acute effects are bad. I mean, we found, higher rates of heart attacks and accidents, after these switches. Again, this is correlation versus causation, right? This is a correlation they found. So I should underline that. It's not helping your systems, and again, we know how much of our body systems are circadian. So when you throw that out of whack, we're just finding more and more repercussions. So you got the acute thing. Now that, we could try to prepare for, we could treat daylight savings time like a trip across the time zone, and we could try to prep our bodies and everything. But yet, it's not like when you're traveling and the light cycle changes.
Right.
It's now going to be permanently shifted. So you're never fully going to adapt. That's the weird thing. So you're going to be out of sync. If we're on daylight savings time, then that means that basically, noon is not when the sun's overhead. And we're trying to, but we've kept our societal schedules the same, between standard time and daylight savings time. So you're having to get up, at a different time. So your body's just going to be out of whack. And standard time more closely aligns with sun being overhead at noon, more of that morning light, darker nights. And if you think about the wintertime, like kids going to school at those early morning hours for middle school and high school, like they're walking to school, riding their bikes to school in the pitch dark for weeks if we went daylight savings time through the winter. So
I know.
But
I'm sleeping at that time of day. I just want it to be light out at night. It's so depressing when the sun goes down so early.
That's when we should all move to the equator so we don't have these short days.
It is interesting actually to think about, like, our circadian clocks are kind of still stuck at this equatorial place, and we're trying to adapt to these other places, and it makes it make a little bit more sense why we would need artificial interventions.
Right. At least those interventions are getting better and better. I mean, now that we can tune LED lights and those wavelengths and then those intensities to try to mimic the sun, I mean, we're getting closer to, artificially living at the equator, I guess you could say.
We could figure out the heat thing.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I mean, the scenery, a little dark apartment, it's not quite the same, but...
Blue light blocking glasses, are they effective or no?
I think they have their place, while also considering these other important tactics like turning down the lights and everything. I think adding the blue light blocking glasses can't hurt. I mean, they're annoying and they color your world, literally, not necessarily in an aesthetically pleasing way. So, but I use them if I'm really have to be on the computer, late at night finishing an assignment or hanging out at a friend's house where they have these, really, really bright lights that they don't, maybe after they read my book, they'll start turning them down, probably annoying them. But I'll put those glasses on to, try to cut down the blue light that's getting to my third photoreceptor. So, I mean, I think they have their place, but I think turning down your lights and enlisting some of these other tools might be a more practical and powerful method.
Is there a way to tell how effective a pair of blue light glasses is?
I would pay attention to the lens color. If glasses are really going to block blue light, they're going to be like a yellowish orange tint. So those clear ones are not going to be nearly as useful. But you can test with, blue light and see what gets through.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, the ones I bought actually came with a little blue light to prove that they worked, right? So you shine this little light and see if
So it's not no light should get through, it's no blue spectrum should get through when you're shining the little light through. And do you have concern about people putting on blue light glasses too early in the day?
Right, so this kind of goes with both. I mean, there's a trend in prescription glasses and even contacts in adding kind of a blue filter to help protect the eyes as part of this advertising for glasses, and that scientists are a little concerned about because you might be blocking some of those really useful rays during the day. So short answer is yes. They have a time and place, but you don't want to wear them too early, as prescription glasses or as specific blue light blocking glasses, because you want those photons at those hours. That said, again, if they're clear, like the prescription coatings that they put on, I don't know how much of the blue light they're really blocking, but you don't want to block blue light during the day. So yeah, it would be weird.
So wait until it's either real night outside or whatever the artificial night that you were trying to create.
3 hours before you want to go to bed. Cut the blue light and intense light out of your life.
If our only goal is optimizing our sleep, is there anything that we should be doing that we haven't talked about yet? Or could you kind of walk us through maybe like a sleep optimizing circadian day?
Sure. So we start the day with getting out of bed and finding the light, seeking the light. So hopefully that's getting outside. If it's dark out, maybe that's just getting in front of a sun lamp.
For how long?
15, 20 minutes. I mean, for the lamp, it depends because it's the intensity, distance. Usually the lamp will come with instructions for how to use it properly. But if you're getting outside, like what you were talking about doing, your 20-minute circadian walk, that's perfect. Yeah, get that daylight. And then, try to get more light as much as you can throughout the day. Now, if you could be working by a window, work by a window, and the closer the better, because the amount of light getting in exponentially drops as you take steps back, which I've found blew my mind how quickly that happens. Then the eating piece. So you make sure maybe it's an hour or so after getting up, have coffee, if you have coffee, I definitely need coffee. Have breakfast, eat that at a consistent time, eat lunch at a consistent time. Breakfast and lunch, those can be fairly large meals compared to dinner. We haven't really gotten into that, but dinner, in addition to being earlier, should probably be lighter. Kind of the opposite of what modern society has done, right? And then, continue to get light during the day. And then as evening approaches, as the sun's starting to set, hopefully dinner comes maybe a little before that. I try to have my dinner a little earlier now, 5 or 6 if possible. Again, life can get in the way, and having a life can get in the way if you want to see friends or go on a date, that kind of thing. So about the time that you're eating and kind of winding down for the night, that's when, maybe try to cut out the blue light and tell the body that the day is coming to an end and start that melatonin peaking and the other good juices, it starts flowing through your body. And another tip I gleaned for sleep is, I have a problem with cold feet. It's a thing. So now for 2 reasons, I try to warm my feet before bed, but hands and feet are, these extremities that you lose heat at night as your core body temperature drops. So actually heating them, as I learned, helps kind of speed that process and helps your core get cooler. It's helping release the heat from your extremities. So, and just a warm shower before bed can be helpful for sleep. And then cutting the temperature too. So you again want to mimic nature. Light during the day, dark at night, warmer during the day, cooler at night. So getting the temperature of your room, if possible, into the mid-upper 60s.
I always tell people that I like it to be 64 when I sleep.
Ooh, that's
And
cool.
people are always like, you must be freezing. And I'm like, no, you get so much. Just try going a little cooler than you think.
Yeah.
I also had the realization recently. I was like, there's no rule about what I have to eat at what time. What we decided is dinner food versus breakfast food feels profoundly arbitrary to me when you think about it.
Yeah.
And so I've swapped, and we meal prep all of our food. So I'll eat my meal prep dinner for breakfast, and then I'll have my smoothie for dinner.
Okay.
And then I'm having the energy that I need to take on my day. I'm eating enchiladas at 8 or 9 in the morning, but it gives you so much more energy. You're so much more satiated. I feel so much better all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's your circadian rhythm, your insulin, your ability to break down carbs and everything peaks a little before noon on average. You put all those calories into your body at that hour, your body can actually make good use of it.
Yeah.
It makes
100%.
total sense.
What about the 3 p.m. slump? Is there anything in the circadian science world about that?
There is. I definitely suffer it. I've learned that if you can keep your circadian rhythms, again, in sync and as strong as possible, that shouldn't be as deep of a slump. But it's a combination of your sleep homeostat and your circadian rhythm. So these are 2 systems that work kind of in coordination with each other. So your sleep homeostat is the buildup of sleep pressure throughout the day. So you sleep, It goes down throughout the day. It grows so you can be ready to go to sleep at night. Meanwhile, your circadian system is, it's pumping out cortisol in the morning and melatonin at night and these other things to try to kind of work with that, but also in a way compensate for it. So the short answer is these two things together, they're not going to always be keeping you fully energized. It's got weak links in the system. So you are going to naturally dip a little bit based on your circadian rhythm as your sleep pressure is building in the afternoon. And then your circadian rhythm is going to kind of catch up and it's going to give you another little boost. You get that second wind in the evening before you get into the melatonin rising along with that. Sleep pressure is really peaking at that hour too.
Oh, that's interesting. So part of it is just to be expected and okay. And if we can set up our lives to maybe not be doing our most high pressure performance tasks around this natural dip, that might be part of the solution.
Exactly. Yeah. And they found that, rise in traffic accidents happens during that dip, all kinds of things. Our alertness. Yeah. All these things are going to, just like they peak, they're naturally going to drop.
I look down at the clock and I'm like, we are podcasting at 3:33 p.m.
Whoa.
So we are in our slumps.
Well, why did you time this? That's okay. So all the times that I messed up, that would be the excuse. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay. So we can account for it, try to schedule around it as much as possible. Maybe not view it almost as a problem, like, oh, this is natural, this is okay. But then also, if we optimize our circadian rhythms, we will experience it less.
You should. And maybe also lean into it a little bit, and a little power nap is okay. Like, short.
Can we do the opposite if we need to be on at 3? Could we, go for a walk outside or blast our face with the sun lamp to get, an instant acute energy effect?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I try to do now if I have the time, is, the quick power nap followed by, the blast of light and getting outside. And if you had to pick one of them, I don't know. Yeah, maybe the natural light energizing effect could be the winner.
But it does work in the moment. The light works immediately. You're not just trying to set your circadian rhythm forever and you're going to experience the effects way down the line. If you need to feel energized in the moment, you can use light to do so.
Absolutely, yeah. Light has many effects: visual, circadian, and also that direct energizing effect.
Okay, we love that.
Among others, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about shift workers. Whenever I do circadian rhythm episodes, my heart goes out to shift workers because we share so much scary information about how this impacts people who aren't able to kind of live more in sync with the sun. So I always like to make sure there's as many pragmatic action tips as possible for people who are doing shift work. And if you're out there doing it, we appreciate what you're doing to keep society afloat. So can you give us the best action steps that we have available to us at this moment?
Yes. We'll just start at big picture. I mean, the first thing is maybe there's some shift work that we don't absolutely need as a society, but we're always going to need doctors. We're always going to need nurses, first responders. So that said, and then the second is, for some people, a night shift is actually biologically healthy. It's a small segment of the population, but finding those people to fill those roles, right? So for some natural night owls, and some people are genetically predisposed to that, then they actually want to work those hours. And I talked to a couple of those individuals, and that actually was healthier for them. Did
they usually self-identify pretty early? Were they able to tell, oh, I naturally am predisposed to this nighttime awake cycle?
Yeah, the folks that I talked to, it was a lifelong struggle adapting to society's schedule. So they kind of knew it early on. And yeah, this one woman I talked to, she was thrilled to have found this job where she's a veterinary pathologist, and she lives in the U.S., but is reading cases from Australia, snakes and other creatures in the middle of the night, her time.
Interesting.
But she feels so much better. Her health has significantly improved.
So if you are in that small subset, you will not experience the negative health effects of being off your circadian rhythm, and your health might even be improved versus sticking to a normal societal circadian rhythm.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Then there's the majority of shift workers who are living out of sync with their inner clocks. And yeah, unfortunately, it's going to lead to health consequences, but the science is pointing now to at least some ways to mitigate some of those effects. So there are things that, the individuals can do, as well as employers and how they design those schedules. The first thing, which is also hard to do, but some individuals can pull it off, is to try to adjust your entire 7-day week to match, if you're doing the night shift, to make night day, essentially. And that involves, again, making sure you're like manipulating your light environment. And if you're leaving work and it's bright and sunny out, but like you need to go to bed soon, that you're like wearing blue light blocking glasses or sunglasses and doing the things to try to keep tricking your body to stay, on making that night shift your day. And doing that, on your days off. And that's really tough, especially if somebody has a family or anything, right? And then the next thing, if you can't work at a job that aligns with your rhythms, if you can't completely shift your rhythms 7 days a week, would be to do what scientists call the compromise schedule. So it's just really trying to minimize that swing back and forth. If on the days you have a shift, think about the time you get up to go to that shift and the time you go to bed, and then see if there's any wiggle room there, and then look at your days in which you're off. Look at your typical bedtime, wake time, see what wiggle room you have. Just try to pull those a little closer to each other, right? So maybe on your weekends you're like doing what we all shouldn't do and like staying up really late and sleeping in the mornings. And then on your work days, maybe you're, just trying to barely get to work on time, to just trying to align those sleep times as much as you possibly can. Because it's really that whiplash. It's like that social jet lag, how much you're moving. And another consideration is, again, we have the light-dark cycle influencing our third photoreceptor master clock. And then we know that food intake has its own direct implications on the clocks, like your liver and your other digestive metabolism systems. So there's science now showing that we might mitigate a lot of the health effects of shift work by having shift workers still align their eating times with the daylight hours. So even if they have to do a night shift, if assuming they're not trying to flip their whole schedule where night is day, right? But if they can still try to eat during daylight hours, do their shift, and keep metabolism clocks ticking, normally, that might help lower the risk of diabetes, obesity, and some of these other health effects that we see in the shift work populations. And again, that's some research out of Harvard. It's been a couple studies now, but ongoing research looking at, these different tools and behaviors that the shift workers can implement to hopefully lower some of these risks. Because it's an unfortunate circumstance for a lot of people.
People always ask me, when should they do their circ walk if they're shift workers? It would be at the beginning of where you would want your day to start, correct? So if you're fully flipping, it would be when you wake up, and it wouldn't probably be a circ walk. It would be sitting in front of a light. Right.
Or maybe if they got a pair of these glasses that I got with the blue light shining in the eye, you can walk around your
But you're mimicking.
You're mimicking. You got to artificially mimic. Right?
Because another takeaway I had, and I would love for you to clarify this, is when I had Dr. Russell Foster on, he says that evening light exposure delays our sleep clock. So if you're walking around at sundown, that's not going to help you go to bed earlier. That's actually going to make it so you want to go to bed later, correct?
Right. If it's still sunny out. Yeah.
If you're seeing the light low on the horizon, if you're seeing sunset light, you're actually delaying the time you would go to sleep. So if a shift worker woke up and it's like 6 p.m. and the sun is going down and they're walking outside to try to start their day, it would be almost having the opposite effect. Is there an optimal time to work out based on our circadian rhythms?
So again, individual, but yes. So as far as performance goes, on average, we peak in the late afternoon, early evening. So that's when we found that our higher percentage of world records are broken, faster swim times, and it's interesting implications, again, going back to the chrono coaches who are trying to help athletes, optimize the times or their inner clock times for competitions. You think about a sports team. I think about my hometown teams, for example, the Seattle Seahawks. We're on the Pacific Coast. Think about a football game that kicks off at 1 p.m. If we have an East Coast rival flying out to play us, their inner clocks at kickoff are going to be at 4 p.m.
Oh.
That's right on average, again, right at when performance starts to peak, and it probably continues to peak throughout the game.
Oh, that's interesting.
So my team's at a disadvantage.
Oh.
Right? So not fair.
That is not fair. So they should be doing the circadian optimization to move them perhaps a little bit later in the day.
Potentially, or at least, I could consider this. But it's also, I'm finding some solace in the fact that the NFL has added more night games. So that actually puts the Seahawks potentially in an advantage. And we've been doing better since they've done that.
Okay. All right. That is fascinating.
End of one, or I'm not sure how many games we've been. But,
that is so interesting. All right. So if we don't give a shit about performance, if we just want to like live our healthiest lives, what are the implications of working out at different times of the day?
Right. So working out, period, is good for your circadian rhythms. So anytime you can do it, but better to be consistent. And studies show that working out earlier in the day, in the morning, can actually be beneficial if your goal is to, say, burn body fat or reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke. And then afternoon workouts, some evidence suggests that that's better for lowering blood sugar. So it's interesting. Different times of day might be different benefits, but they're all benefits.
It is interesting. I just want to underline that you said do it consistently. It feels like if we had one takeaway about our circadian rhythms, it likes the same things at the same time. So if you're going to work out, do it at the same time. If you're going to eat a meal, do it at the same time. If you're going to alter your course of your day by having light and dark at a different time, do it at the same time. As much as possible, whatever you can do it as consistently as possible. Would you say that's like the number one takeaway for circadian rhythm optimization?
I could put it at number one. Absolutely. I mean, because that kind of ties it all together too, right? Consistency and the contrast in your day and night and everything else. So yes, because your body wants to anticipate and be ready for change in its environment. If you feed it the same cues every day, if you're exposed to the same environment and have the same behaviors, it's going to be ready. It's going to be ready to give you what you need at that time.
Well, and I don't know if it's circadian related, but like we had a gastroenterologist on the podcast and he was like, one of the best ways to fight constipation is just to sit on the toilet at the same time every single day. And you're literally like training your body. Our bodies are like how you would train a baby. You just want to be like, here's what you do at this time, and your body will learn and it will get those cues. And then it will be like, oh, I'm on the potty right now. This is what I'm supposed to do right now. It really is learning its clock and learning the clock that you're teaching it.
Yeah.
Which is
that's
really
great.
cool.
I like that. Yeah.
We love to leave people with one homework assignment, something that they can do as soon as they're done listening to this podcast to begin to experience positive effects. So if we wanted to optimize our circadian rhythms, can you give us one specific action step we can take?
Do your homework on your own body. Get in tune with your own circadian clocks. So go take a vacation.
Oh, that's the best homework assignment that we've gotten yet.
Take a vacation and don't bring the alarm clock. If there's one in your hotel room, you unplug it. And wake up when you want to wake up. Go to bed when you want to wake up. And then pay attention to that. Take notes. Take notes on how you feel. When are you peaking and when are you, dropping in energy, all these things we've been talking about. And then see if you can create some wiggle room in your life to try to match that as best as possible. 7 days a week, consistently.
I love that. You heard it here first. Take a vacation. It's scientist orders. Can you tell us a little bit in your own words about your amazing book?
Sure. The Inner Clock. It's been a few years in the making, and I got to do quite a bit of experimentation on myself. You could say I went on vacations for this book to, a bunker under the midnight sun of Alaska and such. And I learned a lot that's really changed the way I live my life in hopes of making my clocks happy. And I really hope that, listeners take away some tips that really help them do the same.
Amazing. Thank you, Lynne.
Thank you so much.
If you loved this episode, you will love the episode that I have with Dr. Russell Foster from Oxford on how to hack your circadian rhythm to boost energy, fight jet lag, and way more. I will link that episode for you in the show notes so you can go and listen next. Oh, just one more thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, a psychotherapist, or any other qualified professional.